All right, hello everyone. This is Germane again. As you know, we've been presenting this Journey Through the Galactic Heritage Cards series, and we're getting really close now to the center point of the deck. If you have not watched the previous videos, we certainly recommend that you do so in the order they were presented so that you can get a very comprehensive understanding of the journey that we're taking. And once again, even if you are not necessarily interested in the cards themselves, this is a wonderful journey to show you a roadmap of how consciousness is moving and evolving from the point of its separation as it moves back toward the source. So up until now, we've been exploring a lot of the other civilizations outside of the Earth. The last section we did was the civilization of Sirius in their ancient past. Now we are going to move to your Earth plane, because your Earth plane, of course, is part of the journey your galactic family is taking. And many of the patterns, pains and wounds and challenges they've had in the ancient past off-world has been brought to Earth, reincarnationally speaking, so that it can be finished. Thus, we're going to take a look then at the first two cards in this next series, which we've found when we work with people, sometimes they don't know how to interpret these particular cards because they're a little bit esoteric. So we're going to look at this first card then. It's number 47. And the theme of the card is Lemurian era. So what does that mean? Well, those of you who are familiar with our work, you know that very often, most of the time really, we don't refer to Lemuria as a continent or a place. We refer to it more as an era of your world. We see that that is more accurate to describe it, because even though there might have been a continent in that area, the idea of the experiences of Lemuria were not simply limited to that continent, but it was the experiences of an era that your planet was experiencing at that time. So what do we mean by an era, and what time frame are we talking about? Well, in general, we are talking about a time period from 13,000 years ago to about 26,000 years ago. You're going to find that these eras move in cycles on your world, and you can, instead of naming them Lemuria as an example, you could instead refer to them as feminine cycles and masculine cycles. And that's really what we're referring to when we talk about the Lemurian era here. So 13,000 to 26,000 years ago, your planet was in what we might call a feminine cycle. Now, in other workshops, many of you have already seen that we've talked a little bit more in depth, Sasha has as well, with what those cycles mean and where they come from. But basically, they have to do with galactic energy. The energy that you feel on your world is really important for the evolutionary processes that you have on your world, and this galactic energy is what kind of dictates the type of evolutionary cycle that you are experiencing based on your position in relationship to galactic core. The ancients on your world knew this. So that's really all we're going to say right now. There's more information about that in other sources. For now, we will simply say that this particular Lemurian era then was very, very significant on your world. You could call it more of a feminine era, but we're not necessarily meaning that that women were in power, or that things were in a more feminine way. It's a little bit different way of looking at it. Simply put, what we are referring to by Lemurian era is that the energy is moving toward integration. So what you're going to find then is that it becomes an era that is, compared to other eras in history, a more spiritual era. Because when you are moving your energy toward integration, that is a time that is much more spiritually focused. It's much more inwardly focused. So during this Lemurian era, it was a very, very significant time when the human species was new. But also the extraterrestrials who were working with your planet at that time were imparting a lot of spiritual teachings to the new humans. So humans were really in that way receiving a lot of love, a lot of energy, a lot of teaching from your forefathers during this time. Now, energy cycles, okay, so in the next card in just a moment we're going to go into how the cycle changed. But for now, during this Lemurian era then, it was a very, very significant era because human species were becoming aware of themselves. They were really moving out of a lesser developmental phase into a more developmental phase, and this was even shown in the capacity of the brain as well. And it was during this time period that there was also quite a lot of upliftment, let's say, genetically from your ET forefathers as well. So this was a very, very significant period that whose energy is kind of latent in the human collective consciousness, but whose energy is beginning to now come to the forefront because you on Earth are now entering another Lemurian era or another positive cycle. And we'll return to that idea in a moment. Okay, so the question we get quite often is, if you get the card, the Lemurian era card, in your reading, how do you interpret it? And we know that many of you, perhaps when you do readings, you don't necessarily go into the deeply intuitive. You don't bring up past life information. It really depends on who is doing the reading and what your comfort level is with your own channeling ability or your own intuition. So if you get the Lemurian era card in a reading, what do you do with that? Well, again, it really has to do with the surrounding cards. It has to do with the person that you're reading. It has to do with your own comfort level with going into your intuition. So our answer then is a little bit general here. If this comes up in a reading, it has to do with the person who's being read having some type of energy coming up from this time period. So it could be a lifetime that most likely represents something either really significant in a positive way or really significant in a negative way in terms of a pain, an old wound. So it's something that you can go really, really deep within, but to explore. But on the surface level, you can say then that it would have to do with the person bringing up or activating more of their spiritual energy and or their feminine energy, which has a lot to do with going out of the idea of doing and more into the idea of being, which is a much more feminine expression. Okay, so we had to include the two main eras. We're coming to the second one in a moment, but we had to include these two main eras to show these cycles of energy in the cards that are representing the cycles of energy on your planet. So that leads us to the next card, and you probably have guessed what the next card is, which is number 48, and the theme is Atlantean era. So the Atlantean era then represents really the last 13,000 years that have passed on your world. And a lot has happened during that time. In contrast to the Lemurian era, it's an era that's representing more of the masculine energy or the mind energy. Hence, you've seen the development of technology and all of that, and civilization itself because of the use of tools and things such as that. That always happens for a civilization during one of its masculine cycles. So just like with the Lemurian card, even though we've called it Atlantean era, we're not referring necessarily to the continent of Atlantis. We are instead referring to the era of Atlantis because it was happening all over the world. This was the time where the interaction with the extraterrestrial civilizations took on a more masculine tone, whereby in the Lemurian era there was a lot of spiritual teaching given to you. In the early Atlantean era, in the last 13,000 years, there was a lot of, you could say, more of a technological focus or an intellectual focus. So a lot of the monuments on your world, such as pyramids and things such as that, were used to their potential at that time. Energetically, spiritually, for uses of power. We're talking about energy power, like pyramids and things such as that. So this was all in the earlier Atlantean period. However, talking about this idea of focusing on the masculine energy, it's also meaning the focusing on the mind energy, which ultimately, at some point, brings you out of balance. So within the 13,000 year span then, as you get closer and closer to current day, because of this focus more on separating yourself from the spiritual energy and moving more into the mind, what you found was a disintegration happening. So Lemurian or feminine cycles are integrative. Atlantean or masculine cycles are disintegrative, where you go more into separation. Okay, so some of the other workshops Sasha and myself have done, we've talked about how just now in 2012, because of the galactic alignment, you have crossed over into the new phase. So you could say it's another Lemurian cycle. So you're moving more into an integrative phase. Now, we want to be clear here that this is not like a pendulum, meaning that you just keep going from one to the other, from one to the other, into infinity. But it's the movement is more like a spiral, and each time you revisit one of the cycles, the cycle itself as a whole is more integrative. So there's progress being made. Okay, so if you received the Atlantean era card in one of your readings, again, how do you read it? Well, it's the same thing that we can say with the Lemurian card. It could have to do with some old lifetimes, probably lifetimes that are unfinished, or in which there was pain or corruption issues, things such as that in the past. It's probably coming out for the person now to heal. Something left unfinished, something that was painful. And because you're moving into a new cycle, there's a transitory phase between cycles, so you're moving from one to the other now at this point on your time stream. Because you're moving to the new cycle, then the old cycle stuff needs to be finished. So that's probably why it has come up in the reading for you. And we've spoken to a lot of people who know quite well and quite clearly perhaps what those issues are that are represented by the Atlantean energy card. If you don't know specifically, it's quite all right. Don't worry about it. It's not necessary. Simply look at the more archetypal meanings for it, which is simply that the Atlantean represents the old masculine era, the old mind era, the old disintegrative era. And some of that stuff is coming up now for healing and resolution. Okay, so both of those cards then are representing the cyclical energy of evolution on your world, from feminine to masculine, yin and yang, back again, but never repeating, always spiraling upward into a higher level of integration. You know, galactic time is very long. We know you're getting impatient, but from the point of view of your galactic eyes, there's no rush, yes? All right, then we go to the next Earth card. Now, by the way, the time stream that's noted on the cards says past. And we've explained this before, but what this is referring to in all the deck, when it says past, is referring to the first era of that species, which is more of a childhood of that species. So it's when the species was very young. Okay, so next card we go to then is number 49. Again, Earth past. And the theme is missing link. Okay, what does that mean and why it's here? Well, this card is kind of a little bit meant to be a nudge for you in terms of giving you an opportunity to ask yourself, what is my missing link for my own evolution? And of course, the more literal meaning in Earth's past is that the extraterrestrial forefathers were the missing link in Earth's history. And most people who are truthful with themselves around the world know it. They know that there is something external that influenced you. Maybe some don't come right out and admit it. But that card on that more superficial level is meant to really tell you that there is an external influence in the human evolution. It is extraterrestrial. And that external influence plays a huge role in who you are as a species, which you're going to see in the next card that we explore in a moment. Okay, so if you've gotten the missing link card in your reading, how do you interpret it? Well, sometimes when you look at all the cards together, you can see that the missing link card is working with another card. And there's another message in the card, let's, as an example, say the Pleiadian card of guilt, that is very clearly saying to you the missing link for your evolution is to address your guilt. So sometimes the missing link card is like an arrow that points to other cards to help you really see the importance of those other cards, okay? So look to the missing link card as being an arrow that points to other cards for a deeper message. Also, it can mean that if you're not seeing it as an arrow in the reading, it might mean that there's still something missing that you're not seeing, and that is coming up soon or in the future as being like the cornerstone for the recognition that you need to have for your next step in your evolution. Okay, so we said then that the missing link card can serve as an arrow to point to other more deeper issues to be addressed. So we're going to look then at the next card in the deck, which is number 50, and it's the card of abandonment. Once again, it's Earth's past. Now, in many of these videos, we have talked to you about the deepest wounds that many of your ET forefathers had. So, for instance, the Pleiades had guilt. The Pleiadians had a lot of guilt. The Zetas really were afraid of their emotional body. Every species has a particular thing that they're challenged with that creates the deepest wound for them that if they choose to work on that wound, it can provide the roadmap back home. So card number 50 then, the abandonment card, is that core wound or that core issue of the human species. This is the issue the human species needs to work on in order to help it find its way home. Why? Well, if you look quite simply at the dynamic of a family, if you have a father or a mother or both who abandon their children, even though the child may grow up in another healthy environment, that core wound of abandonment always remains. Whether it's recognized or not, it is on the unconscious level and it is affecting the person's life. If you take that on a collective level, look what happened with your forefathers. During the Lemurian era and part of the Atlantean era, they were here openly. They were acting as your parents. They were giving you the support that a new civilization needs. And then they left. Now, we're not going to really go into the reasons that they left. There's a lot of political reasons and situational reasons and things such as that. It really doesn't matter from the point of view of a child species whether the reason was good or not. The wound was created just the same. The wound of abandonment by the celestial parents. Then the civilization is left on its own to develop its own society and its own relationship to God or the universe. And what you've seen on your world is that in an attempt to try to create a continued relationship with the parental figures from the cosmos, man created religion as a poor substitute for its connection to its original parents and to its original home in the cosmos. So religion and certain methods of thought were an attempt to heal the wound so that you would not feel so separated and alone. Now, just like with all the wounds we've talked about from all the different civilizations, there is usually an initial wound that happens on the physical level, but it's always reflecting the original wounds when you separated from Source. And when you separated from Source, of course, eventually you felt alone, and that archetypal abandonment wound was initially triggered. So all wounds that come after that, whether it be on a species level, whether it be on an individual personal level, all those abandonment wounds are triggering the original wound back to the source. So, because this is such a significant wound, because it goes all the way back to the source, to original separation, this is another reason why you can see, we've said over and over again, how humanity is helping the entire galactic family heal. Because as humanity works with its issues of abandonment, it reverberates, the healing reverberates through the galactic family all the way back to original source. So that when that wound is seen clearly, when the guilt and the shame is removed, that you've done anything wrong to deserve to be abandoned, when all of that is removed, you can then see yourself clearly, and your road back home toward the one becomes easier and easier and easier. So this abandonment card then, on the species level, on the collective level of the all who separated, and on the personal level, is one of the biggest issues to resolve. And this is how Earth is helping the entire galactic family to heal and to move forward on a path of integration back to the One. All right, so that concludes this particular video with the First Era Earth cards. The next video, we will explore Second Era Earth as well, because this story continues, and this story of this very significant wound continues to play out in the next era as well, as you will see. All right, thank you for your attention. Until next time, we send you much love.